The morning commuter train to Denver pulled into Millfield Station with its usual screech of brakes and hiss of steam. Among the crowd of passengers waiting on the platform stood Sarah Bennett, clutching her worn leather portfolio against her chest. At 28, she carried herself with quiet dignity despite the whispers that followed her wherever she went. Today would be different, though she didn't know it yet. Today, a stranger's voice would cut through the cruelty like a blade, through silk, and everything she believed about herself would begin to change. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah had been making this same journey every Tuesday for the past 6 months, traveling from her small apartment in Millfield to the corporate offices in Denver, where she worked as a freelance graphic designer. The 40-minute train ride had become a routine she both dreaded and accepted as a necessity. Her car had broken down in the spring, and the repair costs had eaten through her savings faster than she cared to remember. The platform at Millfield Station buzzed with its usual mix of commuters, travelers, and locals. Sarah positioned herself near the far end, away from the main crowd, but close enough to board when the train arrived. She'd learned this strategy over months of travel: stay visible enough to catch the conductor's attention, but distant enough to avoid unwanted interactions. "Good Lord, look at the size of her," came a voice from behind her, not particularly quiet, but not quite a whisper either. Sarah's shoulders tensed, but she kept her eyes fixed on the approaching train. She'd heard worse, and she'd developed thick skin over the years. "How does someone let themselves get like that?" Another voice chimed in, this one belonging to a woman in a sharp business suit who was speaking to her companion. "It's just laziness, pure and simple." Sarah shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her grip tightening on her portfolio. Inside were the latest designs for Morrison & Associates, a mid-sized marketing firm that had been giving her steady work. The project was her biggest contract yet, a complete rebrand for a chain of family restaurants. If it went well, it could lead to the kind of steady income that would let her fix her car and maybe even move to a better apartment. The train pulled into the station with a great whoosh of steam and the screech of metal on metal. Passengers began moving toward the doors, and Sarah found herself swept up in the general flow of people. She'd purchased her ticket online and had it ready on her phone, just like always. "Excuse me, miss." The conductor, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and graying temples, smiled at her as she approached the steps. "Ticket ready?" Sarah held up her phone, showing the digital ticket. The conductor nodded and was about to wave her aboard when a commotion erupted behind them. "Are you seriously going to let her on the train?" The voice belonged to a young man in an expensive leather jacket, probably in his early 20s, with perfectly styled hair and an attitude that suggested the world owed him something. "Look at her, she's going to take up 2 seats at least." A murmur of agreement rippled through the small crowd that had gathered behind Sarah. She felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she kept her chin up and tried to step onto the train. "I have a ticket," she said quietly, her voice steady, despite the tremor she felt inside. "Oh, I'm sure you do," the young man continued, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "But what about the rest of us? Some of us actually pay for first-class seats and don't want to be squished next to, well, you know." "That's enough," the conductor said firmly, but the damage was already spreading. Other passengers had begun to take notice, and Sarah could feel dozens of eyes on her. A woman with bleached blonde hair and too much makeup pushed forward from the crowd. "He's got a point, you know. I paid good money for my ticket, and I shouldn't have to be uncomfortable because someone can't control themselves around a dinner plate." The laughter that followed felt like a physical blow to Sarah's chest. She'd dealt with comments and stares her entire adult life, but something about this public humiliation felt different, worse. Maybe it was because she'd been having such a good morning. Her latest designs had received praise from the client. She'd managed to catch the train on time, and for once she'd felt almost optimistic about the future. "Look, I don't want to cause any trouble," Sarah said, taking a step back from the train. "Maybe I can catch the next one. Now hold on just a minute." The voice that cut through the crowd was deep, calm, and carried an unmistakable authority. Heads turned toward the speaker, a tall man in his mid-30s with broad shoulders, wearing a clean but well-worn denim shirt and dark jeans. His brown hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd been working outdoors, and his hands, Sarah noticed, were the hands of someone who worked with them for a living. The man stepped through the crowd with the easy confidence of someone who was used to being listened to. He wasn't rushing, wasn't aggressive, but there was something about his presence that made the jeering voices fall silent. "I couldn't help but overhear the conversation," he said, his eyes moving from the young man in the leather jacket to the blonde woman and then to the conductor. "And I have to say, I'm pretty embarrassed for all of you right now." "Look, cowboy," the young man said, apparently attempting to regain control of the situation, "this doesn't concern you. We're just trying to have a civilized discussion about passenger comfort." The stranger, Sarah still didn't know his name, turned his full attention to the young man. There was no anger in his expression, just a kind of steady disapproval that somehow seemed more powerful than shouting would have been. "Civilized?" he repeated, and there was almost amusement in his voice. "Son, I've spent most of my life around livestock, and I've never heard bulls in a pen say anything as crude as what just came out of your mouth." A few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. The young man's face reddened, but he didn't back down. "What's your point?" "My point," the stranger said, stepping closer to Sarah, "is that you're all standing here, acting like jackals picking on someone who's done nothing except try to board a train she's paid to ride. And frankly, it says a lot more about your character than it does about hers." Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. In 28 years, she couldn't remember a single instance of a stranger standing up for her like this. Usually, people either joined in the mockery or simply pretended not to notice. This man was doing neither. "Now," the stranger continued, turning back to the conductor, "is there a reason this lady can't board the train she's purchased a ticket for?" The conductor shook his head quickly. "No, sir, no reason at all. Ma'am, please, go ahead and board." But Sarah hesitated. The young man and his supporters were still there, still glaring at her, and she knew the train ride was going to be 40 minutes of whispered comments and pointed stares. The stranger seemed to sense her hesitation. He leaned closer to her, speaking in a voice low enough that only she could hear. "Don't let them win," he said simply. "You've got every right to be on that train, and you've got nothing to be ashamed of." Sarah looked up at him, really looked at him for the first time. His eyes were a warm brown, and there was genuine kindness in them. Not pity, not sympathy, but respect. It had been so long since someone had looked at her that way that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like. "Thank you," she whispered. "Nothing to thank me for," he replied. "Just stating facts." Sarah boarded the train, her portfolio still clutched against her chest, but her spine a little straighter than it had been 5 minutes ago. The stranger followed behind her, and she wondered if he was traveling to Denver too, or if he'd simply decided to make sure she got on the train safely. The car was about half full, with scattered passengers reading newspapers, checking their phones, or staring out the windows at the Colorado landscape rolling by. Sarah found an empty row near the middle and settled into the window seat, placing her portfolio on the seat beside her. To her surprise, the stranger stopped at her row. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, gesturing to the aisle seat across from her. "Of course not," Sarah said, then immediately worried that she sounded too eager, but the man just smiled and settled into the seat with the easy movements of someone comfortable in his own skin. "I'm Marcus Hayes," he said, extending his hand across the aisle. "Sarah Bennett." His handshake was firm but gentle, and his hands were indeed working hands, calloused and strong. "Nice to meet you, Sarah. And I'm sorry about what happened back there. That was completely uncalled for." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks again, but this time it wasn't entirely from embarrassment. "It's not the first time. Probably won't be the last." "Well, it shouldn't happen at all," Marcus said firmly. "People can be cruel when they think there won't be any consequences for their behavior." The train had begun to move, and the rhythmic clacking of wheels on tracks filled the momentary silence between them. Sarah found herself studying Marcus's profile as he looked out the window. There was something solid about him, something that suggested reliability and strength without arrogance. "Are you heading to Denver for work?" she asked, surprising herself. Usually she avoided conversation with fellow passengers, preferring to keep to herself and avoid potential awkward situations. "Meeting with some potential clients, actually," Marcus replied, turning back to face her. "I run a ranch, about an hour outside of Millfield. We raise organic beef cattle, and I'm trying to expand our direct-to-consumer market in the city." "That sounds interesting. How long have you been ranching?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "About 10 years now. Took over the operation from my grandfather when he passed. It's been in the family for 3 generations. There was pride in his voice, but not the boastful kind. The quiet pride of someone who loved what they did for a living." "What about you? What takes you to Denver?" Sarah hesitated for a moment. She was used to people making assumptions about her employment, or lack thereof, based on her appearance. "I'm a graphic designer. I work with a marketing firm there. On various projects." "No kidding. What kind of projects?" The genuine interest in his voice surprised her. "Right now, I'm working on a complete rebrand for a restaurant chain. New logo, new marketing materials, website design, the whole package." "That's impressive. Must take a lot of creativity and technical skill." Sarah felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment. "I enjoy the challenge. Every client is different, and figuring out how to capture their vision and translate it into something visual, it's like solving a puzzle." "I can relate to that. Ranching's similar in some ways. Every day brings different challenges, and you have to be creative in your problem solving. Weather, market conditions, animal health. There are a lot of variables to manage." As the conversation continued, Sarah found herself relaxing in a way she rarely did around strangers. Marcus asked thoughtful questions about her work and seemed genuinely interested in her answers. He talked about his ranch with obvious passion, describing the challenges of sustainable farming and the satisfaction of raising healthy cattle. "Do you enjoy living in the city?" Marcus asked as the Denver skyline began to appear in the distance. "I actually live in Millfield," Sarah said. "I just commute to Denver for work. I prefer small towns, honestly. There's less noise." Marcus nodded understanding. "I get that. I lived in Denver for a few years after college, working for an agricultural consulting firm. It was good experience, but I was never really happy there. Too many people, too much rush. When my grandfather got sick, coming back to the ranch felt like coming home." "What did you study in college?" "Business and agricultural science. Figured if I was going to run a ranch, I should understand both the practical and financial sides of it." "What about you?" "Art and design with a minor in marketing. I always knew I wanted to do something creative, but I also wanted to make sure I could make a living at it." "Smart approach. A lot of people think creativity and business sense are mutually exclusive, but they're not." The train began to slow as they approached Denver's Union Station. Sarah felt a surprising pang of disappointment that the conversation was ending. It had been months since she'd had such a natural, comfortable talk with anyone, let alone a stranger. "This is my stop," she said, gathering her portfolio. "Mine too, actually." Marcus stood and stepped into the aisle to let her out. "Sarah, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I think you're handling a difficult situation with a lot of grace. What happened at the station, that was about their character, not yours." Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. "Thank you for saying that, and thank you for speaking up back there. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Marcus said simply. "It was the right thing to do." As they walked off the train together, Sarah found herself hoping their paths would cross again. But Denver was a big city, and Millfield, while small, wasn't so small that everyone knew everyone else. The chances of running into Marcus Hayes again seemed slim. "Well," she said, as they reached the main concourse of Union Station, "I hope your meetings go well." "Thank you, and I hope your client loves the restaurant designs." They stood there for a moment, neither seeming quite ready to part ways. Finally, Marcus reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. "Listen, I know this might sound forward, but would you be interested in grabbing coffee sometime? I don't get to Denver very often, but when I do." He trailed off, looking almost shy for the first time since she'd met him. Sarah stared at the card in her hand. Hayes Ranch was printed in simple, elegant letters, along with a phone number and email address. "I'd like that," she said, and meant it. 3 days later, Sarah found herself staring at Marcus's business card for what had to be the 20th time. She'd placed it on her desk next to her computer, where it caught the afternoon light streaming through her apartment window. Hayes Ranch. The simple lettering seemed to mock her indecision. Her phone buzzed with a text from her client at Morrison and Associates. The restaurant rebrand was moving forward faster than expected, and they wanted to meet the following week to discuss the next phase. Good news professionally, but it meant another train ride to Denver, another potential encounter with the kind of people who had made Tuesday morning so miserable. Sarah pushed the thought away and focused on her current project, designing promotional materials for a local bakery in Millfield. The work was smaller scale than the Morrison contract, but she enjoyed working with local businesses. There was something satisfying about helping her neighbors succeed. A knock at her apartment door interrupted her concentration. Sarah glanced. At the clock, 4:30 in the afternoon. She wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, she saw Mrs. Chen from the apartment next door, holding what appeared to be a covered dish. "Hello, Mrs. Chen," Sarah said, opening the door. "How are you?" "Very good, very good," Mrs. Chen replied in her careful English. She was originally from Taiwan and had moved to Millfield 5 years ago when her son got a job at the local hospital. "I make too much soup. You take some?" This had become a familiar routine. Mrs. Chen frequently cooked too much food and shared it with Sarah, who suspected the older woman worried about her eating alone all the time. Sarah had tried to reciprocate by helping Mrs. Chen with various tasks around her apartment, fixing a leaky faucet, helping with English paperwork, setting up her new television. "That's very kind of you," Sarah said, accepting the warm container. "What kind of soup?" "Wonton soup. Very good for cold weather." Mrs. Chen peered past Sarah into the apartment, her eyes falling on the business card prominently displayed on the desk. "You have a gentleman caller?" Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "Oh no, it's not like that. Just someone I met on the train." Mrs. Chen's eyebrows rose with interest. "Handsome man?" "Mrs. Chen," Sarah began, but the older woman was already nodding approvingly. "Good. You need a nice man. Too much time alone is not healthy for young women." After Mrs. Chen left, Sarah found herself thinking about the conversation as she heated the soup. The older woman wasn't wrong. Sarah did spend most of her time alone. Work, home, occasional trips to the grocery store or library. She'd convinced herself it was by choice, that she preferred solitude to dealing with other people's reactions to her appearance. But meeting Marcus had reminded her of something she'd forgotten, How good it felt to have a genuine conversation with someone who saw her as a person first. The soup was delicious, filled with delicate wontons and fresh vegetables. As she ate, Sarah made a decision. She picked up her phone and Marcus's business card. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Hayes Ranch, this is Marcus." "Hi, it's Sarah. Sarah Bennett? From the train on Tuesday?" "Sarah! I was hoping you'd call. How did the client meeting go?" "Really well, actually. They want to move forward with the next phase of the project." Sarah was surprised by how natural the conversation felt, as if they'd been friends for years rather than acquaintances who'd met once. "That's fantastic. You must be pleased." "I am. It's the biggest project I've ever worked on." Sarah paused, gathering her courage. "I was wondering if you'd still like to get that coffee. I know you said you don't get to Denver often, but I could drive out of your way if that's easier." "Actually, I have a better idea. What are you doing Saturday afternoon?" Sarah mentally reviewed her weekend plans, which consisted entirely of work and laundry. "Nothing specific. Why?" "Well, I've got to pick up some supplies in Millfield, and there's a little cafe on Main Street that makes excellent coffee and homemade pie. Would you be interested in meeting around 2? Miller's Cafe? Sarah knew the place, a small family-owned restaurant that had been a Millfield institution for decades. "That's the one. Great food, and the owner, Betty Miller, makes the best apple pie in 3 counties. "I'd love to," Sarah said, and realized she meant it completely. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made Colorado famous. Sarah spent more time than usual getting ready, changing clothes twice before settling on a simple sweater and jeans. She arrived at Miller's Cafe 5 minutes early and was surprised to find Marcus already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee and what appeared to be a slice of pie. "You're early too," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Occupational hazard. When you work with livestock, you learn to be early for everything. Animals don't understand the concept of fashionably late." Marcus grinned and pushed one of the coffee cups toward her. "I took the liberty of ordering. Black coffee, right? That's what you had on the train." Sarah was touched that he'd remembered. "Perfect, thank you. And I ordered a slice of Betty's apple pie to share. I hope you don't mind presuming, but it really is exceptional." The pie was indeed exceptional, flaky crust, perfectly spiced apples, and a hint of cinnamon that made Sarah close her eyes in appreciation after the first bite. "This is incredible," she said. "I've lived in Millfield for 2 years and never tried their pie." "Well, that's a crime that needed correcting," Marcus said with mock seriousness. "Betty would be heartbroken if she knew there was someone in town who hadn't experienced her baking." As if summoned by her name, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and a warm smile approached their table. "Marcus Hayes, you charmer. I see you're corrupting another innocent soul with my pie. Betty, I'd like you to meet Sarah Bennett. Sarah, this is Betty Miller, proprietor of the finest establishment in Millfield." "Oh, stop it," Betty said, but she was clearly pleased. "Sarah, it's lovely to meet you. I don't think I've seen you in here before." "I usually cook at home," Sarah said, "but after tasting this pie, I think I'll be a regular customer." "Well, you're welcome any time, dear, and Marcus, your grandfather, would be proud to see you bringing such a lovely young lady for coffee." After Betty left, Marcus shook his head with amusement. "She's known me since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. Used to give me free cookies when my grandmother brought me to town for errands." It must be nice having that kind of connection to a place. Growing up where your family has roots. It is, though it can also feel a bit like living in a fishbowl sometimes. Everyone knows everyone's business. Marcus took a sip of his coffee. "What about you? Where did you grow up?" "All over, really. My dad was in the military, so we moved every few years. I was born in North Carolina, lived in Texas, Georgia, California, and Germany before I turned 18. That must have been challenging, never staying in one place long enough to really settle in. Sarah nodded. It was. I got good at being the new kid, but I never really learned how to put down roots. I think that's part of why I like small towns now. They feel more stable, more permanent. Is that why you chose Millfield? Partly. Also, the cost of living is reasonable, and it's close enough to Denver for work, but far enough away to feel separate. Sarah hesitated, then decided to be honest. And it's small enough that I can mostly avoid situations like what happened at the train station. Marcus's expression grew serious. Sarah, can I ask you something? And feel free to tell me it's none of my business. Okay. How long have you been dealing with that kind of treatment? Sarah considered the question. My whole adult life, really. I wasn't always... I gained weight in college and then more after graduation. Stress, poor eating habits, not enough exercise, the usual suspects. That's not what I meant. No. Sarah looked down at her hands. People have been making comments for about 8 years now. It got worse after I moved to Colorado. I think the altitude and climate change triggered something, and I gained more weight. The comments got meaner. Have you considered that maybe their comments say more about them than about you? That's easy to say, but when you hear it every day... Sarah trailed off, realizing she was sharing more than she'd intended. Every day. Not literally every day, but often enough. At the grocery store, walking downtown, on public transportation. People think they're being helpful, or they think I can't hear them, or they just don't care. Sarah met his eyes. That's why what you did Tuesday was so unusual. Most people either join in or pretend it's not happening. Marcus was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. My sister went through something similar in high school. Not exactly the same situation, but she was bullied relentlessly for being different. It nearly destroyed her self-confidence. What happened? She found her people, joined the theater program, discovered she had a talent for costume design. She's in Los Angeles now, working for a major studio, but it took years for her to believe in herself again. Marcus looked directly at Sarah. The point is, she didn't change who she was to make the bullies happy. She found her place, her purpose, and people who valued her for who she is. That's inspiring. It's also true for you. You're talented, intelligent, kind, and stronger than you give yourself credit for. Anyone who can't see that is missing out. Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but they were good tears. Thank you for saying that. I'm not just saying it, I mean it. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of the cafe, clinking dishes, quiet conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine, filling the space between them. So, Marcus said finally, tell me about this restaurant project you're working on. What's the vision? Sarah launched into a description of the rebranding effort, explaining how she was trying to capture the family-oriented, comfort food atmosphere while modernizing the visual identity. Marcus asked thoughtful questions and offered insights from his own business experience. You should consider reaching out to local ranchers for sourcing, he suggested. A lot of restaurants are looking for farm-to-table partnerships, and it could be a selling point in your marketing materials. That's a great idea. Do you know anyone who might be interested? Marcus grinned. I might know a guy. As the afternoon wore on, their conversation ranged from work to books to travel dreams. Sarah learned that Marcus had spent a summer in Ireland studying sustainable farming techniques, and she shared stories from her childhood moves, describing the different landscapes and cultures she'd experienced. I've always wanted to go back to Germany, she said. We lived near the Black Forest when I was 15, and it was absolutely beautiful. Rolling hills, dense woods, little villages that looked like something from a fairy tale. What's stopping you? Money mostly, and work. It's hard to take extended time off when you're freelancing. Maybe someday when your business takes off, you can take a working vacation, design projects for European clients, see the sights while you're there. That sounds amazing, but pretty unrealistic. Why unrealistic? You're already working with national clients. International isn't that much of a leap. Sarah was struck by Marcus's confidence in her abilities. It was so different from her own self-doubt, so different from the message she got from the world around her. You really think I could do something like that? Sarah, in the few hours I've known you, you've impressed me with your professionalism, creativity and business sense. I have no doubt you could take your work international if that's what you wanted. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the cafe windows, Sarah realized she'd been talking and laughing for over 3 hours. It was the longest social interaction she'd had in months, and certainly the most enjoyable. I should probably head home, she said reluctantly. I have some work to finish tonight. Of course, but I hope we can do this again soon. I'd like that very much. Marcus walked her to her car, an older Honda that she kept meticulously maintained despite its age. Sarah, he said as she unlocked the door, I want you to know that meeting you has been the highlight of my week. You're remarkable, and I hope you're starting to see that about yourself. Before she could respond, he leaned over and kissed her cheek gently. It was a simple gesture, almost brotherly, but it made Sarah's heart race. Drive safely, he said, stepping back with a smile. Sarah drove home. She caught herself smiling in the rearview mirror. For the first time in years, she felt genuinely happy, not just content or resigned, but actually happy. It was a feeling she'd almost forgotten was possible. That night, she called her mother for the first time in 2 months. Sarah, what a wonderful surprise. How are you, sweetheart? I'm good, Mom, really good. I wanted to tell you about someone I met. The conversation with her mother lasted nearly 2 hours, the longest they'd spoken since Sarah had moved to Colorado. Margaret Bennett had always been supportive, but there was something different in her daughter's voice that night, a lightness that had been missing for years. He sounds wonderful, sweetheart, her mother said, after Sarah finished describing her afternoon with Marcus. But more importantly, you sound happy, really happy. I am, Mom. For the first time in a long time, I feel like myself again. You know, your father and I have been worried about you. Not because of anything you've done wrong, but because we could hear the sadness in your voice whenever we talked. We didn't know how to help. Sarah felt a pang of guilt. She'd been so focused on protecting herself from judgment that she'd inadvertently shut out the people who loved her most. I'm sorry I've been so distant. I didn't want to burden you with my problems. Sarah Elizabeth Bennett, listen to me. You are never a burden. You're our daughter, and we love you unconditionally. We always have, and we always will. After they hung up, Sarah sat on her small couch, feeling lighter than she had in months. She looked around her apartment, really looked at it, and realized how sterile it had become. Functional furniture, neutral colors, no personal touches beyond her work supplies. It was the apartment of someone who was hiding from life rather than living it. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Marcus would text her good morning messages that always made her smile, and they'd talk on the phone most evenings. Sometimes about work. His ranch was expanding, and her Morrison project was gaining momentum, but often about everything and nothing. Books they'd read, places they wanted to travel, childhood memories, dreams for the future. On the 3rd, Saturday after their coffee date, Marcus invited her to visit the ranch. Nothing fancy, he said during one of their evening phone calls. Just thought you might like to see what I do for a living. Fair warning, though, it's actual ranch work. You might get dirty. I think I can handle a little dirt, Sarah replied, surprising herself with her eagerness. The Hayes Ranch was located 15 miles outside Millfield, down a winding gravel road that cut through rolling hills dotted with aspen trees in their full autumn glory. Sarah had borrowed Mrs. Chen's pickup truck for the day, promising to return it with a full tank of gas and a detailed report about the nice rancher boy. The ranch house was a modest two-story structure with a wraparound porch and flower boxes under the windows. It looked exactly like what Sarah imagined a family ranch should look like, welcoming but practical, well-maintained but lived in. Marcus emerged from the barn as she pulled up, wearing work clothes and a genuine smile that made her heart skip. "Perfect timing," he called out. "I just finished the morning feeding." "This place is beautiful," Sarah said, getting out of the truck and taking in the view. The ranch stretched out in all directions, with cattle grazing in the distance and the Rocky Mountains forming a dramatic backdrop. "Thanks. My great-grandfather chose the location well. Good water, good grazing, and the most beautiful sunrises you'll ever see." Marcus gestured toward the house. "Want some coffee before the grand tour?" The interior of the ranch house was as welcoming as the exterior. The kitchen was clearly the heart of the home, with a large wooden table, copper pots, hanging from hooks, and family photos covering one entire wall. Sarah found herself drawn to the pictures. 3 generations of Hayes men working the same land, family gatherings, holiday celebrations. "That's my grandfather, Thomas Hayes," Marcus said, pointing to a photo of a weathered man with kind eyes and a confident smile. "He built most of what you see here. Started with 50 acres and 20 head of cattle. He looks like he was a good man. The best. He taught me everything about ranching, but more importantly, he taught me about integrity. He used to say that your word is the most valuable thing you own, and once you lose it, you can never really get it back." They spent the morning touring the ranch facilities. Marcus explained his operation with obvious pride. The sustainable grazing practices, the organic certification process, the direct-to-consumer sales that allowed him to maintain higher profit margins while providing better quality beef to his customers. "The hardest part isn't the physical work," he said, as they watched a group of cattle in a nearby pasture. "It's the business side, marketing, financial planning, dealing with regulations. Some days I feel more like an accountant than a rancher. That's where good design and marketing can make a real difference," Sarah said. "Have you thought about updating your website, maybe developing some promotional materials?" Marcus laughed. "My website consists of 1 page with my contact information and a paragraph about the ranch. I built it myself about 5 years ago, and it shows. I could help with that if you're interested. As a friend, I mean, not as a business transaction. I couldn't ask you to do that." "You're not asking, I'm offering. Besides, it would be fun to work on something completely different from corporate branding." As they walked back toward the house, Sarah noticed a small vegetable garden near the kitchen door. Even in late October, there were still tomatoes on the vine and herbs growing in neat rows. "Do you do all this yourself?" she asked. "Mostly. I have 2 part-time hands who help with the cattle and maintenance, but the garden is all mine. My grandmother started it 60 years ago, and I try to keep up the tradition. It's impressive. I can barely keep a houseplant alive. It's all about consistency and patience, not unlike working with cattle, actually. You can't force things to grow faster than they're supposed to." They spent the afternoon in Marcus's office, a converted bedroom on the 2nd floor, with windows overlooking the entire ranch. Sarah sketched ideas for a new website layout, while Marcus worked on his quarterly reports. It was companionable work, interrupted occasionally by conversation or shared observations about the view outside. "What made you decide to go organic?" Sarah asked during one of these breaks. "A combination of things. Market demand was part of it. Organic beef sells for a premium, but mostly it was about sustainability and animal welfare. My grandfather always treated his cattle well, but the industry standards have changed a lot over the years. Going organic was a way to get back to the kind of ranching he believed in. That must have been a big transition. 3 years of paperwork and inspections, plus significant changes to our practices, but it was worth it. I sleep better at night knowing our cattle live good lives and our land is healthier for the next generation. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Marcus suggested they watch from the porch. He brought out 2 mugs of hot chocolate and a blanket, which they shared on the porch swing his grandfather had built. "This is my favorite time of day," Marcus said, his arm naturally settling around Sarah's shoulders. "No matter how stressful the day has been, this view puts everything in perspective." Sarah leaned into his warmth, feeling more content than she could remember. "I can see why. It's like the whole world slows down." That's exactly right. City people always think country life is boring, but they're missing the point. It's not about constant stimulation. It's about finding peace in the simple things. "I think I'm starting to understand that." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky and the first stars appear. Sarah found herself thinking about her conversation with her mother, about the changes she'd been making in her own life without fully realizing it. "Marcus," she said eventually, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you stand up for me that day at the train station? You didn't know me. You had no obligation to get involved." Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "I've been thinking about that myself, actually. Part of it was just basic decency. Nobody deserves to be treated like that. But there was something else, too." "What?" "You reminded me of my sister when she was being bullied. The way you held yourself, trying to stay dignified even when people were being cruel. It took real strength, and I recognized that strength because I'd seen it before. I didn't feel strong. I felt humiliated. That's what made it strength. Anyone can be brave when they feel confident. Real courage is maintaining your dignity when everything inside you wants to run and hide." Sarah felt tears gathering in her eyes, but they were good tears. "Thank you for seeing that. I'm not sure I saw it in myself." Sometimes it takes an outside perspective to recognize our own strengths. As the evening grew cooler, they moved inside. Marcus made dinner, a simple but delicious meal of grilled chicken, roasted vegetables from his garden, and homemade bread that he'd learned to bake from his grandmother. "This is incredible," Sarah said after her first bite. "You're going to spoil me for restaurant food." "Good. I like cooking for people who appreciate it." Over dinner, their conversation turned to future plans. Marcus talked about his hopes for expanding the ranch's direct sales, maybe even opening a small farm store on the property. Sarah shared her dream of eventually starting her own design agency, maybe specializing in agricultural and rural businesses. "You should do it," Marcus said. "You have the talent and the business sense. What's holding you back?" "Fear, mostly. What if I fail? What if I can't find enough clients? What if I'm not as good as I think I am? What if you succeed beyond your wildest dreams?" The question hung in the air between them. Sarah realized that she'd been so focused on potential failure that she'd never seriously considered the possibility of success. "I never thought about it that way," she admitted. "Fear is natural, but it shouldn't be the deciding factor. My grandfather used to say that the biggest risk is not taking any risks at all." After dinner, they sat by the fireplace in the living room, continuing their conversation late into the evening. Sarah found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone: her insecurities about her work, her loneliness in Millfield, her struggles with self-doubt. Marcus listened without judgment, offering insights and encouragement that felt genuine, rather than patronizing. In return, he opened up about his own challenges, the pressure of carrying on a family legacy, the financial stress of running a small business, his own periods of self-doubt. "Sometimes I lie awake at night wondering if I'm doing right by my grandfather's memory," he confessed. "He made this place successful with nothing but hard work and determination. I have all the advantages of modern technology and business education, but some months I still struggle to make ends meet." "But you're doing something he never had to do," Sarah pointed out. "You're competing in a completely different market, dealing with regulations and requirements he never faced. Plus, you're doing it sustainably and ethically, which adds another layer of complexity. I never thought about it that way." "Sometimes it takes an outside perspective," Sarah said, echoing his earlier words. As the evening wound down, Marcus walked her to the truck. The night was clear and cold, with more stars visible than Sarah had ever seen from her apartment in town. "Thank you for today," she said. "This has been wonderful. Thank you for coming. It's been a long time since I've had someone to share this place with who really understood what it means. I'm not sure I understand completely, but I'm beginning to." Marcus stepped closer, and Sarah's heart began to race. "Sarah, I hope you know how special you are, not just to me, but in general. You have so much to offer the world." Before she could respond, he kissed her. It was gentle but sure. A kiss that spoke of genuine affection and growing feelings. When they broke apart, Sarah felt dizzy with happiness. "I should let you get home," Marcus said softly, "but I hope we can do this again soon." "I'd love that." As Sarah drove back to Millfield, her mind was spinning with everything that had happened. The day had been perfect in ways she couldn't have imagined, but more than that, it had shown her possibilities she'd never considered. For the first time in years, she felt excited about the future rather than simply resigned to it. Her phone buzzed with a text just as she pulled into her apartment complex. It was from Marcus. "Thank you for a perfect day. Sweet dreams. Beautiful." Sarah stared at the word beautiful for a long moment. When was the last time someone had called her that? When was the last time she'd felt beautiful? But sitting in the truck, still warm from Marcus's kiss, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to see herself the way he saw her. The Morrison and Associates meeting room buzzed with an energy Sarah had never experienced in her professional life. Her restaurant rebrand presentation had not only exceeded expectations, it had sparked a conversation about expanding the project beyond anything she'd originally proposed. "Sarah, this is exceptional work," said Jennifer Morrison, the firm's founder, as she flipped through the printed portfolio. "The way you've captured the family atmosphere while modernizing the brand identity, it's exactly what Hometown Kitchen needed." Around the conference table, the representatives from Hometown Kitchen, a regional chain of family restaurants, nodded in agreement. The CEO, Robert Walsh, had been particularly vocal in his praise. "We've worked with several agencies over the years," Walsh said, "but nobody's captured our vision like this. The new logo feels both contemporary and timeless, and these marketing materials, they make me want to eat at our own restaurants." Sarah felt a flush of pride mixed with disbelief. 6 months ago, she'd been scrambling for small local projects to pay her rent. Now she was sitting in a Denver boardroom being praised by executives who could transform her career. "Which brings us to our proposal," Jennifer continued. "Hometown Kitchen wants to expand into 3 new markets over the next 18 months. They need a complete marketing strategy, from grand opening campaigns to ongoing promotional materials. Sarah, they've specifically requested that you lead the project." The room fell silent as everyone looked at her. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. This wasn't just a design project, it was a comprehensive marketing campaign that would require months of work and almost certainly mean establishing a more permanent presence in Denver. "I'm honored," Sarah said carefully, "but this sounds like it might be beyond the scope of freelance work. This is the kind of project that usually requires an agency team." "That's exactly what we're thinking," Jennifer said with a smile. "Sarah, we'd like to offer you a position here at Morrison and Associates, Senior Creative Director, with your own team and the flexibility to take on outside projects that don't conflict with our client base." Sarah felt the world tilt slightly. It was everything she'd dreamed of professionally, but the timing felt surreal. Just when she'd started building a life in Millfield, just when she'd found someone who made her believe in herself again, opportunity was calling her back to the city. "Can I have some time to think about it?" she asked. "Of course. Take a week." "But Sarah, opportunities like this don't come along often. You've impressed everyone in this room, and frankly, you've impressed yourself. It's time to stop thinking small." The drive back to Millfield gave Sarah plenty of time to process what had just happened. Her phone buzzed repeatedly with congratulatory texts from the Morrison team, but all she could think about was how to tell Marcus about the job offer. She found him exactly where she expected, in the barn, checking on a cow that had been showing signs of illness. He looked up when she entered, his face breaking into the familiar smile that never failed to warm her heart. "How did the big presentation go?" he asked, pulling off his work gloves. "Better than I ever imagined," Sarah said, but her tone didn't match the positive words. Marcus studied her face with the perceptiveness she'd grown to appreciate. "That doesn't sound like someone who just had the meeting of their career. What's wrong?" Sarah sat down on a hay bale and told him everything. The client's reaction, the expanded project, the job offer. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. "That's incredible, Sarah. It's exactly what you deserve." "But?" "No. It's a fantastic opportunity, and you should be proud." "Marcus, I can hear the but in your voice." He sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "The only but is that I'm going to miss you terribly if you move to Denver. I haven't said yes yet. Haven't you? Sarah, this is your dream job. Everything we've talked about, building your career, starting your own agency someday, working with national clients, this is the path to all of that." Sarah felt tears threatening. "What about us? What about what we've been building here?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "I'd be lying if I said the timing wasn't difficult. But Sarah, I care about you too much to be the reason you don't pursue your dreams. You're not the reason. You're part of what makes me want to stay, and that means everything to me. But if you turn down this opportunity for me, you'll resent it eventually. Maybe not next month or next year, but someday." That evening, Sarah called her mother again, needing perspective from someone who'd known her longest. "Oh, sweetheart, what a wonderful problem to have," Margaret Bennett said after hearing the whole story. 6 months ago, you were struggling to find work, and now you're being offered your dream job. But what about Marcus? What about the life I'm starting to build here? Sarah, let me ask you something. If Marcus weren't in the picture, what would you do? "I'd take the job without hesitation." "And if the job weren't available, how would you feel about your future with Marcus?" "Like I could be happy in Millfield forever." Then you have your answer. The question isn't whether to choose Marcus or the job. The question is whether you can find a way to have both. After hanging up, Sarah spent the evening researching commuter options between Millfield and Denver. The train ride she'd been taking for client meetings was doable for daily commuting, though it would mean long days and less flexibility. There were also several small towns between Millfield and Denver where she could potentially relocate, close enough to the city for work, but still within reasonable distance of Marcus's ranch. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Sarah opened her apartment door to find Jennifer Morrison standing in the hallway, looking slightly out of place in her designer suit among the modest surroundings. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by," Jennifer said. "I was in the area visiting a client and thought we might talk in person." Over coffee at Miller's Cafe, Sarah was becoming a regular, just as she'd predicted. Jennifer laid out a proposal that Sarah hadn't expected. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," Jennifer said, "and I realize we may have been too hasty in assuming you'd need to relocate to Denver. Morrison and Associates has been considering opening a satellite office in one of the smaller mountain communities, Somewhere we could serve rural and agricultural clients more effectively. Sarah's heart began to race. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you accept our offer, we'd be willing to let you establish our first regional office right here in Millfield. You'd still need to be in Denver regularly for major client meetings, but your day-to-day work could be based here. We'd start with you and an assistant, with room to grow as the client base expands. That seems like a big risk for Morrison & Associates. Not really. We've been wanting to diversify our client base beyond Denver metro area businesses. Having an office in a rural community would give us credibility with agricultural and small-town clients we've never been able to reach effectively. Sarah felt like she was dreaming. What would Marcus say about this? She thought, then caught herself. What mattered was what she thought about it. I'm very interested, she said aloud, but I'd still like that week to consider everything. Of course, but Sarah, I want you to know that this offer is a reflection of how highly we think of your potential. We don't make proposals like this lightly. That afternoon, Sarah drove out to the ranch without calling ahead, something she'd never done before. She found Marcus in his office, working on what appeared to be financial projections. "This is a pleasant surprise," he said, standing to greet her with a kiss that felt both familiar and thrilling. "I needed to see you. Jennifer Morrison came to Millfield this morning." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Your potential boss made a house call?" Sarah explained Jennifer's proposal, watching Marcus's expression change from surprise to something that looked like hope. "That's incredible," he said when she finished. "It's like someone designed a solution specifically for your situation." "It does seem almost too good to be true. What are your concerns?" Sarah had been thinking about that all afternoon. "What if I'm not ready for this kind of responsibility? What if I fail and damage both my reputation and Morrison's? What if the satellite office concept doesn't work and I end up unemployed in 6 months? What if you succeed beyond everyone's expectations and build something amazing?" Sarah smiled. "You sound like a broken record with that question." "Because it's the right question. Sarah, you've been underestimating yourself for so long that you can't see what everyone else sees. You're talented, dedicated, and you understand both the creative and business sides of what you do. If Morrison & Associates is willing to bet their reputation on you, maybe it's time you bet on yourself." That evening they cooked dinner together in Marcus's kitchen, a habit that had developed over the past few weeks. As they worked side by side, chopping vegetables and sharing stories from their days, Sarah realized how natural this had become, how right it felt. "Marcus," she said as they sat down to eat, "if I take this job, what does that mean for us?" "What do you want it to mean?" "I want it to mean that we keep building something together, that we see where this goes." Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. "That's exactly what I want too, even though my life is about to get much more complicated." "Sarah, life is complicated anyway. The question is whether you want to face the complications alone or with someone who cares about you." "With someone," she said without hesitation. "Then we'll figure it out as we go." The next few days passed in a blur of planning and preparation. Sarah researched commercial real estate in Millfield, thinking about what kind of space would work for a satellite office. She spoke with her current clients about the transition and was relieved to find that most were supportive and excited about her expanded capabilities. On Thursday evening, Marcus surprised her with a proposal of his own. "I've been thinking," he said as they walked through his vegetable garden, checking on the late-season plants. "If you're going to be commuting to Denver regularly, you're going to need reliable transportation. That old Honda of yours is great for local driving, but it's not built for daily highway use." "I've been thinking about that too. I'll probably need to get a car loan." "Actually, I had a different idea. What would you think about moving in here with me?" Sarah stopped walking. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. Think about it practically. You'd save money on rent. You'd have a more reliable commute from here to the train station, and I'd get to see you every day instead of just weekends. Marcus, we've only been dating for a month. I know it's fast. But Sarah, I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. I'm not talking about marriage or anything permanent yet, just sharing space while we both figure out what we want our futures to look like. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. It was fast, maybe too fast, but it also felt right in a way that surprised her. What about my independence? What if this doesn't work out? Then we'll deal with it like adults. But what if it does work out? What if this is the beginning of something incredible? That night, Sarah lay awake in her apartment, staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything that had changed in such a short time. 6 weeks ago, she'd been a struggling freelancer with low self-esteem and no prospects for change. Now, she was considering a dream job and a relationship that challenged everything she thought she knew about herself. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. No pressure on any decisions. Just wanted you to know that whatever you choose, I'm proud of you for having the courage to choose. At that moment, Sarah realized that her decision had already been made. Not just about the job or about Marcus, but about herself. She was tired of living in fear, tired of making choices based on what might go wrong instead of what might go right. She picked up her phone and typed a response. I love you too. Then she opened her laptop and began drafting an email to Jennifer Morrison. The email to Jennifer Morrison was shorter than Sarah had expected it to be. After hours of drafting and redrafting, she realized that some decisions didn't require lengthy explanations. They just required courage. Jennifer, I'm accepting your offer, both the position and the opportunity to establish the Millfield office. When can we start discussing the details? Best regards, Sarah. She hit send at 2:47 in the morning, then immediately felt wide awake. Despite her exhaustion, there was no taking it back now. In a few hours, her entire life would begin changing in ways she could barely imagine. Sarah's phone rang at 7:30 a.m. sharp. She'd been expecting it. Sarah, I'm absolutely thrilled. Jennifer's voice was bright with enthusiasm despite the early hour. I'll be honest. I was worried you might decide the opportunity was too much too soon. I was worried about that too, Sarah admitted. But I realized that being scared isn't a good enough reason to say no to something that could be incredible. Excellent. Attitude. Now we have a lot to discuss. Can you come to Denver today? I know it's short notice, but I'd like to get the paperwork started and begin planning the Millfield office launch. 3 hours later, Sarah found herself back in Morrison, an associate's conference room, but this time as an employee rather than a contractor. The reality of her decision hit her as she signed her employment contract and benefit enrollment forms. Your official start date is next Monday, Jennifer explained, but we're treating this week as a planning period. I want you to scout potential office locations in Millfield, and we'll need to discuss staffing, equipment, and your initial client development strategy. About that, Sarah said, pulling out a folder she'd prepared during the drive to Denver. I spent some time researching potential clients in the area. There are quite a few agricultural businesses and rural service providers who could benefit from professional marketing and design services. Jennifer flipped through Sarah's research, her expression growing more impressed with each page. This is incredibly thorough. You've already identified twice as many potential clients as I was expecting. There's something else, Sarah continued. I know someone who runs a successful organic ranch operation. He's been looking to expand his marketing efforts, and he'd be perfect as our first case study. If we can help him develop a comprehensive brand strategy and show measurable results, it would be excellent proof of concept for other agricultural clients. Who is this rancher? Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks but pushed forward. Marcus Hayes. He runs Hayes Ranch about 15 minutes from Millfield. We've been dating. Jennifer's eyebrows rose slightly, but her expression remained professional. Normally I'd be concerned about potential conflicts of interest, but given that this is essentially a startup operation and he'd be helping us establish credibility in a new market, I think it could work. As long as you can maintain professional boundaries, I can do that. Good. Set up a meeting with Mr. Hayes for early next week. I'd like to meet him and discuss the possibility of featuring his ranch in our initial marketing materials for the Millfield office. By the time Sarah returned to Millfield that evening, her head was spinning with everything that needed to be accomplished. She'd identified 3 potential office spaces, scheduled appointments to view them over the next 2 days, and begun drafting a business plan for the satellite office that Jennifer wanted to present to the Morrison & Associates board. Marcus was waiting for her at her apartment with takeout from the Chinese restaurant in town and a bottle of wine. "I figured you'd be too exhausted to cook," he said, greeting her with a kiss that felt like coming home. "You figured right. How did you know I'd have good news?" "Because you're amazing, and anyone who doesn't recognize that is an idiot." Over dinner, Sarah filled him in on the day's developments, including Jennifer's interest in featuring Hayes Ranch in their marketing strategy. "That's fantastic," Marcus said, "but are you sure mixing business with our personal relationship is a good idea?" "I've been thinking about that. What if we approach it differently? What if you become our first client, not because we're dating, but because your ranch represents exactly the kind of business Morrison & Associates wants to serve in rural markets?" "Explain." "You're a third-generation family operation that's successfully modernized while maintaining traditional values. You've adapted to current market demands without compromising your principles. You're the perfect example of rural American business success." Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering. "You really think Morrison & Associates wants to feature a small ranch operation? I think they want to prove they can serve rural clients as effectively as urban ones. Your ranch isn't small, it's selective. There's a difference. When you put it that way, plus working with you would give me the chance to really understand agricultural marketing from the inside. I'd learn things that would make me better at serving other rural clients." "All right, I'm in, but I have one condition." "What's that?" "You charge your normal rates. I don't want any special treatment just because we're together." The next few days blurred together in a constant stream of planning and preparation. Sarah viewed office spaces, interviewed potential assistants, and worked with Morrison & Associates' IT department to set up the technology infrastructure for the new location. The space she ultimately chose was a converted storefront on Millfield's Main Street, 2 blocks from Miller's Cafe and directly across from the town's small but well-maintained park. The building had good bones, high ceilings, large windows, and a layout that would accommodate both private offices and collaborative work areas. "It's perfect," Jennifer said when she came to Millfield on Friday to see the space. "Visible, enough to establish our presence in the community, but professional enough to inspire confidence in potential clients. The landlord is willing to work with us on improvements," Sarah added. "New paint, updated lighting, and modern furniture should transform it completely." "Excellent. I've brought the contracts for you to sign, and we've approved your budget. For furnishing and equipment, you should be able to open within 2 weeks." That afternoon, Jennifer accompanied Sarah to Hayes Ranch for the meeting with Marcus. Sarah had been nervous about how the 2 of them would interact, but her concerns proved unfounded. Jennifer was impressed by Marcus's knowledge of sustainable agriculture and his clear vision for expanding his direct-to-consumer sales, while Marcus appreciated Jennifer's straightforward approach and genuine interest in understanding his business. "Mr. Hayes, I'll be honest," Jennifer said as they concluded their tour of the ranch facilities. "Morrison & Associates has never worked with agricultural clients before. We're hoping this partnership will teach us as much as it helps you." "I appreciate the honesty," Marcus replied. What specifically are you hoping to learn? How to effectively market agricultural products to urban consumers, how to communicate the value of sustainable farming practices, how to help rural businesses compete with larger operations. Those are exactly the challenges I've been facing. I know I have a superior product, but I struggle to communicate that to potential customers who don't understand the difference between conventional and organic beef production. That's where Sarah comes in. Her job will be to bridge that gap, to translate your expertise into language that resonates with your target market. As they walked back toward the house, Jennifer pulled Sarah aside. He's impressive, and more importantly, his operation is exactly what we need to establish credibility in this market. If we can help him significantly increase his sales, every other agricultural business in the region will want to work with us. That evening, Marcus made dinner while Sarah worked on her laptop, finalizing the timeline for the office opening and the Hayes Ranch marketing project. "I've been thinking about something," Marcus said as they sat down to eat. "What's that?" "This whole situation, your new job, the office in Millfield, working together professionally. It's a lot of change happening very quickly." Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety. "Are you having second thoughts?" "Not at all. But I want to make sure we're both approaching this thoughtfully. We're essentially integrating our personal and professional lives in a way that could be wonderful or complicated. What are you suggesting?" "I think we should establish some ground rules, clear boundaries between work time and personal time, agreed upon ways to handle any conflicts that might arise, regular check-ins to make sure both aspects of our relationship stay healthy." Sarah smiled. "You've been thinking about this seriously." "I have. Because what we have is too important to risk losing to misunderstandings or unclear expectations." They spent the next hour developing what Marcus jokingly called their relationship and business partnership charter. It included provisions for keeping work discussions out of personal time, maintaining professional behavior during business hours, and having monthly reviews to assess how both relationships were progressing. "This feels very adult," Sarah said as she typed up their agreements. "Good. Because what we're building together, both personally and professionally, deserves to be treated seriously." The weekend brought Sarah's parents for their first visit to Colorado. Margaret and David Bennett had driven from their home in Arizona, curious to meet the man who had brought such positive changes to their daughter's life. Sarah was nervous about the visit, but her concerns proved unnecessary. Marcus charmed her. Had parents with his genuine warmth and obvious affection for their daughter, while David Bennett and Marcus discovered a shared interest in sustainable agriculture that led to hours of animated conversation. "I like him," Margaret told Sarah privately, while the men were outside examining Marcus's vegetable garden. "But more importantly, I like who you are when you're with him. You're more confident, more yourself than I've seen you in years. He makes me feel like the best version of myself. That's what the right person should do. Not change you, but help you become who you were always meant to be." On Sunday evening, as her parents prepared to continue their journey home, David Bennett pulled Marcus aside for a brief conversation. Sarah couldn't hear what was said, but she saw her father shake Marcus's hand with obvious approval. "What did my dad say to you?" she asked after her parents left. "He told me that he and your mother had been worried about you for a long time, and that seeing you happy made their whole trip worthwhile. That's all," Marcus smiled. "He also said that if I ever hurt you, he knows how to use a shotgun." "Oh God, I'm so embarrassed." "Don't be. I respect a father who looks out for his daughter. Besides, I have no intention of giving him a reason to demonstrate his marksmanship." Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made Colorado's reputation for beautiful falls. Sarah stood in front of her new office, keys in hand, feeling a mixture of excitement and terror that reminded her of her first day of college. The space looked completely different than it had a week ago. Professional painters had transformed the walls from dingy beige to a warm grey. New lighting made everything bright and welcoming, and the furniture deliveries had created distinct work areas that somehow felt both modern and comfortable. Jennifer arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, carrying a bottle of champagne and a broad smile. "Are you ready to make history?" she asked. "As ready as I'll ever be." They popped the champagne and toasted the official opening of Morrison & Associates' first satellite office. As Sarah looked around the space, her space, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. 6 months ago, she'd been struggling to find clients and questioning her abilities. Now she was launching her own office and preparing to lead a team. "Sarah," Jennifer said, setting down her glass, "I want you to know that this wasn't a favor or an act of charity. You earned this opportunity through talent, hard work, and vision. Don't ever let anyone, including yourself, suggest otherwise. Thank you. That means everything to me. Now let's get to work. We have a ranch to rebrand and a market to conquer." As Jennifer headed back to Denver and Sarah began setting up her computer and planning her first week, she thought about everything that had led to this moment, the humiliation at the train station that had seemed so devastating at the time, Marcus's unexpected defense and the confidence he'd helped her discover, the gradual rebuilding of her self-worth and professional ambitions. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Proud of you, boss lady. Can't wait to see what you build here." Sarah smiled and typed back, "Thank you for believing in me before I believed in myself." "Always," came his immediate reply. Looking out the window of her new office at the bustling street scene of small-town life, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do, with exactly the right person by her side. The girl who had been mocked at the train station was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her worth and wasn't afraid to claim her place in the world. 6 months. After opening the Millfield office, Sarah stood before the Colorado Small Business Association's annual awards ceremony, holding a crystal trophy that felt surreal in her hands. The Morrison & Associates satellite office had just been named Rural Business Initiative of the Year, and she was still processing the magnitude of what had been accomplished. The Hayes Ranch rebrand had exceeded everyone's expectations. Marcus's direct-to-consumer sales had increased by 340% in just 4 months, and the case study had attracted 12 new agricultural clients to the Millfield office. But the real transformation had been in Sarah herself, and in how the community of Millfield had come to see her. "Ladies and gentlemen," the ceremony host announced, "please welcome Sarah Bennett, Creative Director of Morrison & Associates Millfield, to share her insights on rural business development." Walking to the podium, Sarah caught sight of Marcus in the audience, his proud smile giving her the confidence boost she needed. Also in attendance were Jennifer Morrison, Betty Miller from the cafe, Mrs. Chen, and even the conductor from the Denver train, Thomas Rodriguez, who had become something of a friend after their numerous conversations during Sarah's commutes. "When I first moved to Millfield 2 years ago," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the nerves, "I thought I was hiding from the world. I was wrong. I was actually finding my place in it." The audience of business leaders, community representatives, and fellow entrepreneurs listened intently as Sarah shared the story of building the satellite office, focusing on the challenges and rewards of serving rural markets that larger agencies had overlooked. "Rural businesses aren't small businesses," she explained. "They're specialized businesses. They're community-centered businesses. They're businesses with deep roots and strong values, and they deserve marketing strategies that reflect those and qualities rather than trying to make them fit urban templates." After the ceremony, the networking reception buzzed with congratulations and business card exchanges. Sarah found herself in conversation with representatives from 3 other states who were interested in replicating the Morrison and Associates satellite office model in their own rural communities. "Ms. Bennett," said a woman from the Montana Economic Development Council, "we've been following your work with agricultural clients. Would Morrison and Associates be interested in consulting on a statewide rural business support initiative?" Before Sarah could answer, Jennifer appeared at her elbow. "Sarah, I think this conversation needs to happen in a more formal setting. Why don't you both visit our Denver office next week?" As the evening wound down, Marcus approached with 2 glasses of champagne and the expression Sarah had learned to recognize. He had something important to say. "Congratulations, award winner," he said, clinking his glass against hers. "Thank you. Though I have to say, none of this would have happened without your ranch as our flagship client." "That's not true, and you know it. My ranch provided one example, but you created a whole new approach to rural marketing. The other 11 clients didn't sign up because of me. They signed up because of you." They found a quiet corner away from the crowd, and Marcus's expression grew more serious. "Sarah, there's something I want to discuss with you, something I've been thinking about for a while." Sarah felt her heart rate increase. In the months since she'd moved to the ranch, their relationship had deepened into something that felt both stable and exciting, but they'd been so focused on their respective career growth that they hadn't talked much about long-term plans. "What's on your mind? This award, this recognition, it's going to bring new opportunities, probably bigger opportunities than anything you've imagined. And I want you to know that whatever direction your career takes you, I'm committed to making it work." "Marcus, let me finish. I love you, Sarah, not just who you are now, but who you're becoming. I see the way you light up when you talk about expanding the business, about helping other rural communities develop their economic potential. I don't want to be the reason you limit yourself." Sarah set down her champagne glass, her hands trembling slightly. "Where is this coming from? Have I given you some indication that I feel limited? No, the opposite. I see how much you've grown, how much confidence you've gained. I also see opportunities coming your way that might require travel, relocation, or commitments that could strain our relationship. And you're breaking up with me preemptively?" Marcus looked startled. "What? No! Sarah, I'm trying to propose to you." The words hung in the air between them. Sarah felt the world tilt, just as it had in the Morrison and Associates conference room 9 months ago. But this time, the sensation was pure joy rather than overwhelming pressure. "You're trying to propose, or you are proposing?" Marcus laughed, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "I'm doing this all wrong, aren't I?" He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Sarah Bennett, you have transformed my life in ways I never imagined possible. You've made me a better person, a better businessman, and definitely a better man. Will you marry me?" Sarah opened the box to reveal a ring that was perfectly her, elegant but not ostentatious, with a central diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the light beautifully. "Marcus Hayes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Are you sure you're ready to be married to someone whose career is about to get much more complicated?" "I'm counting on it. I want to be your partner in everything, the business successes, the challenges, the adventures we haven't even imagined yet." Then yes. Absolutely yes. The engagement ring fit perfectly, and as Marcus slipped it onto her finger, Sarah was struck by how right everything felt. Not perfect, perfection was an illusion, but right in all the ways that mattered. Their news spread quickly through the reception, generating congratulations from colleagues, clients, and new acquaintances. Jennifer Morrison was particularly effusive in her excitement. "This is wonderful news," she said, embracing both of them. "And it actually ties into something I've been wanting to discuss with you, Sarah." "What's that?" "The board has been reviewing the success of the Millfield office, and we want to expand the satellite program." We're looking at 5 potential locations across the Mountain West, and we'd like you to head up the entire Rural Expansion Initiative. Sarah felt Marcus's hand squeeze hers as the implications of Jennifer's offer sank in. That would mean a lot of travel during the setup phases, Jennifer continued. And eventually, it might mean relocating to manage the program from a more central location. I know it's a big ask, especially with your personal news, but Sarah, you've proven that you can build something remarkable. We want to scale that success. Can I have some time to think about it? Sarah asked, the same words she'd used 9 months earlier when everything had started to change. Of course, but Sarah, this isn't just about Morrison and Associates anymore. What you've built here could transform rural economic development across the entire region. That's a legacy worth considering. Later that evening, back at the ranch, Sarah and Marcus sat on the porch swing, where they'd shared their first quiet moment together, watching the stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. A lot has happened today, Marcus said, his arm around her shoulders, the understatement of the year. Sarah held up her hand, admiring the way the ring caught the porch light. Are you having second thoughts about proposing to someone whose boss just offered her a job that could require constant travel? Not even slightly. Are you having second thoughts about saying yes to someone who's tied to a specific piece of land? Never. Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking, Marcus, what if we approach this the same way we approached working together? What if we figured out how to make it an adventure we share instead of an obstacle we overcome? What do you mean? The ranch is profitable now, and you've got good employees who can handle day-to-day operations. What if you came with me? What if you became my business partner as well as my life partner? Marcus turned to look at her more directly. Explain. Think about it. You understand agricultural businesses better than anyone I know. You've got practical experience with rural economic challenges. If Morrison and Associates is serious about expanding into agricultural markets across the region, they're going to need someone who can speak the language of ranchers and farmers. You want me to leave the ranch? I want us to build something together. The ranch will always be here, and it will always be home. But Marcus, you have knowledge and insights that could help hundreds of rural businesses. Why limit that impact to one operation? Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring out at the pastures where his cattle grazed under the moonlight. My grandfather built this place from nothing, he said eventually. And you've made it more successful than he ever imagined. But Marcus, your grandfather was an entrepreneur. He took risks, tried new things, built something that didn't exist before. Isn't that exactly what we'd be doing? When you put it that way. Besides, Sarah added with a smile, someone needs to keep me grounded when I get too caught up in big-picture thinking. Who better than a practical rancher who knows how to solve real-world problems? The next morning brought a flurry of phone calls as word of both Sarah's award and her engagement spread through their network. Mrs. Chen appeared with homemade dumplings and tears of joy. Betty Miller called to offer the cafe for an engagement party, and even Sarah's parents called from Arizona with congratulations and demands for wedding planning details. But the most unexpected call came from Robert Walsh, the CEO of Hometown Kitchen Restaurants. Sarah, I heard about your award last night, and I have a proposition for you, he said. We're looking at expanding into rural markets, smaller towns that can support a family restaurant but don't have the population for our typical locations. We'd like Morrison and Associates to consult on the entire strategy, from site selection to local marketing. That sounds like a significant project. It is. We're talking about potentially 50 new locations over the next 3 years. But here's the thing. We want you to lead it personally, not just the marketing and design work, but the entire rural expansion strategy. Sarah felt the familiar thrill of a new challenge, combined with the daunting realization of how much her professional life was about to change. Mr. Walsh, I'm very interested, but I should mention that I'm considering some significant changes in my own career structure. Can we set up a meeting to discuss this in detail? Absolutely. And Sarah, whatever changes you're considering, I hope they include room for this project. What you've accomplished in Millfield proves you understand rural markets in a way that could revolutionize how national companies approach small-town expansion. After hanging up, Sarah found Marcus in the barn, checking on the pregnant cow that had been his main concern for the past week. How's she doing? Should deliver within the next day or two. First calving, so I'm keeping a close eye on her. Marcus looked up from his examination. You look like someone who just got offered the opportunity of a lifetime. Sarah filled him in on Robert Walsh's call, watching Marcus's expression shift from surprise to excitement. Sarah, that's incredible. A 50-location expansion consulting contract? That's the kind of project that could establish Morrison and Associates as the leader in rural market development. It's also the kind of project that would require me to travel constantly for the next 3 years. Site visits, community meetings, local relationship building. And you're worried about what that means for us. I'm worried about what that means for the life we're trying to build together. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then smiled. What if it doesn't mean anything negative? What if it means we get to build that life while doing something that matters? I don't follow. Sarah, you just described exactly the kind of work I've always dreamed of doing, helping rural communities thrive economically, and you're doing it at a scale that could impact thousands of families and hundreds of towns. But the travel, the time away. What if there wasn't time away? What if we did it together? Sarah stared at him. Are you serious about leaving the ranch? I'm serious about building a life with you. The ranch will always be important to me, but it's not the only important thing anymore. You are. The work you're doing is. The difference we could make together is. That afternoon, they drove to Denver together for a meeting Sarah had requested with Jennifer Morrison. She'd spent the morning thinking about everything that had been offered to her, everything she wanted to accomplish, and everything that mattered most. Jennifer, Sarah said as they settled into the familiar conference room, I want to accept the rural expansion position, but I have some conditions. I'm listening. First, I want Marcus as my business partner on this initiative. He knows agricultural and rural business operations better than anyone, and he understands the community dynamics that make these projects succeed or fail. Jennifer looked at Marcus with interest. What's your background in business consulting? None formally, Marcus replied honestly. But I've been running a successful agricultural operation for 10 years. I understand rural economics from the ground up, and I know how to talk to farmers and ranchers in language they trust. That's exactly what we need, Jennifer said after a moment. What else, Sarah? I want equity in whatever entity we create for this expansion work. Not just salary and bonuses, but ownership stake. If we're going to build something this significant, I want to be invested in its long-term success. Fair request. Anything else? Sarah took Marcus's hand under the table, drawing strength from his support. I want this to be the beginning of something bigger, not just a consulting contract, but a new approach to rural economic development. I want to create a model that other regions can replicate, other companies can adapt. Sarah, Jennifer said with a smile, that's exactly the kind of thinking that's going to make this venture a success. As they walked out of the Morrison and Associates building that evening, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since the first time she'd nervously entered that same lobby as a freelance contractor hoping for steady work. Any regrets? Marcus asked as they reached the parking garage. Only one. What's that? I regret that it took me so long to believe I deserved all of this. Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her. Sarah Bennett, You didn't just deserve this. You created it. Every success, every opportunity, every positive change, that's all you. With a little help from a rancher who saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. No, Marcus said firmly. I just reminded you of what was already there. As they drove back toward Millfield and the life they were building together, Sarah thought about the young woman who had been humiliated at the train station less than a year ago. That woman had believed she was powerless, worthless, invisible, except as an object of ridicule. Now she was planning to transform rural economic development across multiple states, building a business that would impact thousands of lives, and marrying a man who saw her as his equal partner in all things. The train station incident had felt like an ending, the final confirmation of her worst fears about herself. Instead, it had been a beginning, the beginning of everything she'd never dared to dream possible. 2 years later, Sarah stood in the grand ballroom of the Denver Convention Center, looking out at an audience of over 800 rural business owners, economic development officials, and community leaders who had gathered for the first annual Rural Innovation Summit. The event, which she and Marcus had conceptualized and organized, had grown far beyond their original vision. When we started this journey, Sarah said into the microphone, her voice carrying easily through the packed venue, we thought we were just trying to help a few agricultural businesses improve their marketing. We had no idea we were tapping into a movement. The audience erupted in applause, and Sarah caught sight of familiar faces scattered throughout the crowd. Betty Miller sat in the third row, having expanded her cafe into a small chain of rural restaurants. Mrs. Chen was there with her son, who had opened a medical practice serving 3 small Colorado towns. Even Thomas Rodriguez, the train conductor, was in attendance. He'd recently launched a transportation consulting business focused on connecting rural communities. But it was the sight of Marcus at the side of the stage that filled Sarah with the deepest sense of accomplishment. Her husband of 18 months had become far more than her business partner. He'd evolved into one of the most respected voices in sustainable rural development, speaking at conferences across the country and consulting with agricultural operations from Montana to Texas. The numbers tell part of our story, Sarah continued. In the past 2 years, businesses participating in our Rural Prosperity Network have seen an average revenue increase of 187%. We've helped launch 43 new enterprises in communities previously considered economically distressed. We've facilitated over $12 million in direct investment in rural areas. The statistics were impressive, but Sarah knew the real story lay in the individual transformations, like Jake Morrison, a former coal miner from Wyoming, who had used their business development program to launch a successful organic farming operation, or Maria Santos, a single mother from New Mexico who had turned her grandmother's tamale recipe into a regional food distribution business. But numbers only tell part of the story, Sarah said, clicking to the next slide in her presentation. The real story is about communities that refuse to accept decline as inevitable. It's about entrepreneurs who saw opportunity where others saw only obstacles. It's about the incredible things that happen when people believe in their own potential. As Sarah spoke, she thought about how dramatically her own life had changed since that humiliating day at the train station. The Rural Prosperity Network, which had started as a simple expansion of Morrison & Associates' satellite office program, had become an independent organization with offices in 6 states and partnerships with universities, government agencies, and private foundations. More importantly, Sarah had discovered that her true calling wasn't just in marketing and design, but in helping others recognize and develop their own capabilities. The shy, insecure woman who had once hidden from the world had become someone who actively sought out people who felt overlooked or undervalued, helping them find their own paths to success. This year, "We're announcing our most ambitious initiative yet," Sarah said, advancing to the final slide of her presentation. "The Rural Innovation Institute, a comprehensive program that will provide seed funding, mentorship, and technical support to rural entrepreneurs across 10 Western states." The announcement generated excited murmurs throughout the audience. Sarah had spent months developing the institute concept with Marcus, Jennifer Morrison, and a team of economic development experts. The program would offer everything from basic business planning workshops to advanced technical assistance, creating a pipeline of rural innovation that could sustain itself for generations. "But here's what makes this program different," Sarah continued. "It's not being designed by urban consultants who think they know what rural communities need. It's being designed by rural communities themselves, with support from people who have lived and worked in these areas their entire lives." After the presentation, Sarah found herself surrounded by potential partners, eager entrepreneurs, and journalists documenting the rural economic renaissance that seemed to be spreading across the Mountain West. But the conversation that mattered most to her took place in a quiet corner of the reception area with a young woman who had waited patiently for the crowd to thin. "Ms. Bennett," the woman said nervously, "my name is Rebecca Walsh. I'm from a small town in Montana, and I've been following your work for the past year." Sarah immediately recognized something familiar in Rebecca's demeanor. The hesitant posture, the careful word choices, the way she seemed to be taking up as little space as possible. "It's wonderful to meet you, Rebecca. What brings you to the summit?" "I have an idea for a business, but everyone back home thinks it's unrealistic. I wanted to hear from people who've actually succeeded in rural markets before I give up on it completely." "Tell me about your idea." Rebecca's entire demeanor changed as she began describing her vision for a mobile veterinary service that would serve ranch operations across eastern Montana. As she spoke, her voice gained strength and her posture straightened. Sarah found herself looking at a passionate, knowledgeable entrepreneur who simply needed someone to believe in her potential. "Rebecca, that's not just a good idea, it's a brilliant idea. The market demand is clearly there. You have the technical expertise, and you understand the logistical challenges. What's making people back home think it's unrealistic?" "Mostly the startup costs and the travel requirements. Plus, Rebecca hesitated, then seemed to gather her courage. "I'm 24 years old, single, and everyone assumes I'll fail because I don't fit their image of a successful business owner." Sarah felt a familiar flash of anger at the narrow-mindedness that kept talented people from pursuing their dreams. "Rebecca, I want you to meet someone." She led Rebecca across the reception area to where Marcus was discussing sustainable grazing practices with a group of ranchers. "Marcus, I'd like you to meet Rebecca Walsh. She's developing a mobile veterinary service for eastern Montana, and I think she'd be perfect for our first Rural Innovation Institute cohort." Marcus's face lit up with interest as Rebecca repeated her business concept. Within minutes, he was introducing her to 3 ranchers who immediately expressed interest in her services and offered to provide references for her business plan. "Rebecca," Marcus said as the conversation wound down, "do you have business cards? These gentlemen are going to want to stay in touch, and I know at least 5 other operations in your area that would benefit from mobile veterinary services." As Rebecca pulled out a small stack of professionally printed business cards, Sarah smiled. Despite her nervousness, the young woman had come prepared. She had the kind of practical optimism that made for successful entrepreneurship. "One more thing," Sarah said, as Rebecca prepared to rejoin the reception. "Don't let anyone convince you that your age or gender or marital status has anything to do with your ability to build a successful business. I've learned that the people who doubt your potential usually say more about their own limitations than yours." That evening, Sarah and Marcus hosted a private dinner for the core team that had made the Rural Innovation Summit possible. The gathering included Jennifer Morrison, who had become more friend than boss over the past 2 years, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, an economic development specialist from Colorado State University, and James Chen, Mrs. Chen's son, who had joined their organization as Director of Community Health Initiatives. "I keep thinking about the enthusiasm in that room today," Jennifer said as they shared dessert at the restaurant Marcus had chosen, for its locally sourced ingredients. 2 years ago, if someone had told me that rural economic development would become the fastest growing sector in our business, I would have thought they were crazy. "It's not growing because it's trendy," Dr. Rodriguez observed. "It's growing because rural communities are finally getting the support and recognition they deserve. For too long, economic development meant convincing rural areas to become more like urban areas. Now we're helping them become the best versions of themselves." "That's exactly right," Marcus added. "Sarah and I see it all the time in our consulting work. The most successful rural businesses aren't the ones trying to copy urban models. They're the ones that leverage their unique advantages." Sarah found herself thinking about Rebecca Walsh and the dozens of other entrepreneurs she'd met that day. Each had a story of initial doubt, either from others or from themselves, followed by the gradual recognition of their own capabilities. "I've been wondering about something," Sarah said to the group. "What if the biggest barrier to rural economic development isn't lack of resources or market access? What if it's simply lack of confidence?" "Explain," James said, leaning forward. "With interest. Think about it. Most of the entrepreneurs we work with have good ideas, relevant experience, and access to markets. But almost all of them start by saying their ideas probably won't work, or they're not qualified, or they don't have what it takes to succeed." "That's a fair observation," Dr. Rodriguez said. "In my research, I've found that rural entrepreneurs often underestimate their own competence while overestimating the challenges they face." "So what's the solution?" Jennifer asked. "Maybe our role isn't just to provide technical assistance and funding," Sarah suggested. "Maybe our primary job is to help people see their own potential." Marcus reached over and squeezed her hand. "Sounds familiar. Someone did that for me once." "Actually, someone did that for both of us. We just had to learn to do it for ourselves." The conversation continued late into the evening, ranging from specific program improvements to broader questions about economic justice and community empowerment. By the time they said their goodbyes, Sarah felt energized in a way that reminded her why she'd fallen in love with this work. As she and Marcus drove back to their hotel, Sarah reflected on how different her life had become from anything she'd imagined possible 3 years earlier. "Do you ever think about that day at the train station?" she asked Marcus as they waited at a red light. "Sometimes." "Why?" "I was just thinking about how terrified I was that day. How certain I was that everyone was right about me, that I was worthless and deserving of ridicule. And now I spend my days helping other people overcome those same feelings. It's like that horrible experience gave me a superpower I didn't know I needed." Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering. "You know what I think? I think that day at the train station was when you first started fighting back. You didn't know it at the time, but something inside you refused to accept their definition of who you were." "What makes you say that?" "Because you got on that train. Anyway, you could have gone home, could have given up on the meeting, could have decided they were right about you. But you didn't. You got on that train, and you went to Denver, and you did the work you'd committed to do." Sarah felt tears gathering in her eyes, but they were good tears. "I never thought about it that way. That's because you were focused on surviving the moment instead of recognizing your own strength. But Sarah, that day wasn't the beginning of your transformation. It was just the first time other people got to see the courage you'd always had." The next morning, brought the final day of the summit, featuring workshops, networking sessions, and the announcement of the first Rural Innovation Institute Fellowship recipients. Sarah had insisted that Rebecca Walsh be included in the inaugural cohort, along with 19 other entrepreneurs from across the region. During the closing ceremony, Sarah found herself once again at the podium, but this time she wasn't alone. Marcus stood beside her, along with Jennifer Morrison and the other core team members who had made the summit possible. "When we started this work," Sarah said, "we thought we were solving a business problem. We were wrong. We were solving a human problem, the problem of people not believing in their own worth and potential." She looked out at the audience, seeing faces that reflected hope, determination, and excitement about the future. Every person in this room has something valuable to offer. Every community represented here has unique strengths and advantages. Our job isn't to change you or fix you. Our job is to help you see what's already there. The applause that followed felt different from the polite recognition Sarah had received during her award ceremonies and business presentations. This felt like the sound of people who had found their tribe, their purpose, their reason to believe in themselves. As the summit concluded and attendees began making their way home to communities across the Mountain West, Sarah felt a profound sense of completion. Not the end of something, but the completion of a circle that had begun with humiliation and self-doubt and had transformed into purpose and empowerment. "Ready to go home?" Marcus asked as they watched the last participants board the shuttle to the airport. "More than ready," Sarah replied, thinking of the ranch that had become their sanctuary and headquarters, the place where they'd learned to build a life and a business together. As they drove out of Denver, passing the train station where their story had begun, Sarah felt overwhelmed with gratitude, not just for Marcus or for their success or for the opportunities that had come their way, but for the woman she'd become. Someone who no longer needed external validation to know her worth, someone who could help others find their own strength, someone who had turned her greatest vulnerability into her greatest gift. The scared, humiliated woman who had boarded that train 3 years ago was gone. In her place was someone Sarah barely recognized but completely embraced. A leader, a visionary, a person who had learned that sometimes the most beautiful life grows from the darkest soil. 5 years after the first Rural Innovation Summit, Sarah found herself in a place she'd never imagined possible, standing in the White House Rose Garden, waiting to be introduced to a gathering of national economic development leaders. The Rural Innovation Institute had become a model for rural economic policy across the United States, and Sarah had been invited to advise on federal rural development initiatives. The irony wasn't lost on her. The woman who had once tried to make herself invisible on a train platform was now being consulted by the highest levels of government on how to empower overlooked communities and undervalued individuals. "Ladies and gentlemen," the Deputy Secretary of Agriculture announced, "please welcome Sarah Hayes, founder and director of the Rural Innovation Institute, and her partner, Marcus Hayes, who will be presenting their groundbreaking research on sustainable rural economic development." Sarah had kept her maiden name professionally, but the personal milestone of becoming Sarah Hayes still filled her with quiet joy. She and Marcus had married in a simple ceremony at the ranch, surrounded by the community that had watched their love story unfold. Mrs. Chen had insisted on catering the reception, Betty Miller had provided the wedding cake, and even Thomas Rodriguez had taken time off from his transportation consulting business to attend. As Sarah stepped to the microphone, she caught sight of a familiar figure in the audience. Jennifer Morrison, now a senior partner at her firm, and one of Sarah's closest friends. Also present was Rebecca Walsh, whose mobile veterinary service had become so successful that she'd expanded into 3 states and was now helping other women entrepreneurs launch similar businesses. 5 years ago, my husband and I started with a simple premise: Sarah began, her voice carrying the confidence born of years of public speaking and countless successful presentations. We believed that rural communities didn't need to be fixed or saved, they needed to be supported and believed in. The audience of policymakers, business leaders, and community development experts listened intently as Sarah shared the data that had transformed how the federal government thought about rural economic development. The Rural Innovation Institute's participants had achieved success rates that exceeded urban business incubators by significant margins, challenging long-held assumptions about where innovation and entrepreneurship could thrive. The traditional model of economic development assumed that talent flowed from rural areas to urban centers, Sarah continued. Our research proves the opposite is also true. When we provide the right support systems, talent flows back to rural communities, bringing urban skills and perspectives that can transform entire regions. Marcus stepped forward to present their latest findings, a comprehensive study showing how rural businesses started by former urban professionals were creating sustainable employment, environmental benefits, and cultural revitalization in communities previously written off as economically obsolete. We've documented over 2,000 cases of successful urban-to-rural business migration in the past 3 years, Marcus said, his presentation style now polished from years of conference, speaking, and congressional testimony. These entrepreneurs aren't fleeing cities, they're choosing rural communities because of unique advantages: lower costs, stronger community support, access to natural resources, and the opportunity to make a meaningful impact. After the formal presentation, Sarah found herself in smaller group discussions with officials from the Department of Agriculture, the Small Business Administration, and the Economic Development Administration. The conversations focused on how to scale the Rural Innovation Institute model nationally, with federal support for regional offices and expanded programming. Ms. Hayes, said the SBA administrator, what would you need to replicate your Colorado success in every rural region of the country? Sarah had been preparing for this question for months. 3 things: sustained funding for at least 5 years, partnerships with land-grant universities in each region, and most importantly, leadership teams that come from the communities they're serving. Explain that last point. Rural economic development can't be imposed from outside. It has to grow from within, supported by people who understand both the challenges and the opportunities. Every successful Rural Innovation Institute office is led by someone who chose to build their career in rural America, not someone who was assigned there temporarily. The conversation continued for over an hour, covering everything from budget requirements to implementation timelines. By the end, Sarah had preliminary commitments for a pilot program that would establish Rural Innovation Institute offices in 25 regions across 15 states. That evening, she and Marcus attended a reception at the Smithsonian Institution, where they were recognized alongside other rural development pioneers. As they mingled with guests, Sarah was struck by how naturally these interactions had become. The shy woman who had once dreaded social situations was now someone who sought out conversations with strangers, always curious about their stories and potential connections. "Sarah Hayes," came a voice from behind her. She turned to see a woman, in her 50s, with silver hair and a warm smile. "I'm Catherine Morrison, and I think you know my daughter Jennifer." "Mrs. Morrison, Jennifer has told me so much about you. It's wonderful to finally meet. The pleasure is mine. Jennifer has been following your work since the beginning, and she's so proud of what you've accomplished." They were joined by Marcus, and Catherine Morrison shared stories of her own rural upbringing in Kansas and her current work with a non-profit supporting women entrepreneurs in agricultural communities. "You know," Catherine said thoughtfully, "Jennifer told me about how you two met, about that incident at the train station. At the time, it must have felt like the worst thing that could happen to you. Sarah nodded. It did. I was humiliated and ready to give up on myself completely. But looking at where you are now, at the thousands of people you've helped, at the communities you've transformed, that terrible moment was actually the beginning of something extraordinary. I've come to see it that way too. Sometimes our worst experiences teach us the most important lessons, Marcus added. That day showed Sarah what it felt like to be dismissed and undervalued. It gave her the empathy and determination to make sure other people don't have to face those feelings alone. As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself in conversation with entrepreneurs from rural communities across the country. Each had a story of initial doubt followed by gradual success, often with support from programs inspired by or directly connected to the Rural Innovation Institute. One conversation particularly moved her, with Maria Santos, the single mother from New Mexico, whose tamale business had grown into a regional food distribution company employing over 40 people. "Ms. Hayes," Maria said, "I wanted to thank you personally. When I first heard you speak 3 years ago, I was making tamales in my kitchen and selling them at farmers markets. I thought that was as big as my business could ever get. What changed your mind?" "You said something that I wrote down and kept on my refrigerator. Your current situation is not your final destination. Every time I felt like giving up or thought I wasn't smart enough to grow the business, I'd look at those words and remember that someone who had built something amazing believed I could too." Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her throat that came with these conversations. "Maria, you did all the work. You had the vision, the product, the determination. All I did was remind you of what was already there. Maybe, but sometimes that reminder is everything." The next morning brought Sarah's final appointment in Washington, a private meeting with the Secretary of Agriculture to discuss long-term rural development strategy. As she and Marcus sat in the imposing federal building, waiting to be called into the meeting, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Are you nervous?" Marcus asked, noticing her contemplative mood. "Not nervous exactly, more like overwhelmed by how much has changed." "In what way?" "I keep thinking about that scared woman on the train platform. If someone had told her that someday she'd be advising the federal government on rural policy, she would never have believed it. That woman was already capable of everything you've accomplished. She just didn't know it yet." The meeting with the secretary proved to be everything Sarah had hoped. Not only did they receive full support for the national expansion of the Rural Innovation Institute, but Sarah was invited to serve on a newly formed Rural Economic Development Council that would advise on federal policy for the next 5 years. "Ms. Hayes," the secretary said as the meeting concluded, "I want you to know that your work has fundamentally changed how we think about rural America. You've proven that these communities aren't problems to be solved, they're solutions waiting to be unleashed." Flying back to Denver that evening, Sarah and Marcus found themselves in first-class seats, a luxury that had become routine as their consulting work took them across the country. Sarah remembered her early train rides to Denver when she'd been grateful just to have a seat and avoid confrontation. "Penny for your thoughts," Marcus said, noting her distant expression. "I was thinking about something Catherine Morrison said last night, about how our worst moments can become the foundation for our best work. Do you agree with that?" "I'm starting to. Not that I'm grateful for being humiliated. I wouldn't wish that experience on anyone, but I think it gave me something I couldn't have gotten any other way." "What's that?" "The absolute certainty that every person has value, regardless of how they look or how others treat them. If I hadn't experienced that kind of dismissal myself, I don't think I could help other people overcome it with the same conviction." Marcus reached over and took her hand. "You know what I think? I think that day at the train station wasn't when your story began. It was when you decided to stop letting other people write your story for you." A week later, Sarah stood once again at Millfield Station, But this time, the circumstances were completely different. She was there for the grand opening of the Rural Innovation Institute's newest satellite office, housed in a beautifully renovated building just 2 blocks from the train platform where everything had started. The ceremony drew hundreds of attendees, including many of the entrepreneurs whose businesses had grown through the Institute's programs. Rebecca Walsh was there with her mobile veterinary team. Betty Miller had brought samples from her expanded restaurant chain, and Mrs. Chen beamed with pride as her son James was introduced as the new director of the satellite office. But the moment that moved Sarah most came when Thomas Rodriguez approached her after the ribbon-cutting ceremony. "Ms. Hayes," he said, "I wanted to thank you for something you probably don't even remember." "What's that, Thomas?" "That first day we met, when those people were being cruel to you at the station. You could have let that experience make you bitter or withdrawn. Instead, you used it to become someone who lifts other people up. That takes a special kind of strength." "Thomas, you were there that day too. You could have spoken up when Marcus did, but you didn't have to. You've spent years since then being kind to passengers, helping people feel welcome and valued. We all have choices about how to respond to cruelty." "I suppose we do. But watching you and Mr. Hayes build something beautiful together, watching you help so many people find their potential, it's been inspiring for all of us who were there that day." As the ceremony concluded and guests began to disperse, Sarah found herself standing alone on the same platform where she'd been humiliated 5 years earlier. The physical space looked almost identical, but everything else had changed beyond recognition. Marcus appeared beside her, following her gaze toward the spot where the confrontation had occurred. "Any regrets?" he asked, echoing a question he'd posed many times over the years. "Just one." "What's that?" "I regret that it took me 28 years to learn that my worth isn't determined by other people's opinions. And if you could go back and tell that woman on the platform one thing, what would it be?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "I'd tell her that the people being cruel to her are revealing their own character, not hers. I'd tell her that kindness exists, that love is possible, and that she has more strength and potential than she can imagine." "And what would you tell the man who defended her?" "I'd tell him that standing up for someone who can't defend herself is one of the most attractive qualities a person can have, and that he's about to fall in love with the most amazing woman he's ever met." Marcus laughed and pulled her close. "I think I already knew that." As they walked back toward their car, Sarah caught sight of their reflection in the station window. A confident woman and a devoted husband, partners in every sense of the word, heading home to continue building a life and a legacy that neither of them could have imagined when they first met. The scared, humiliated woman who had once stood on this platform was gone, replaced by someone who had learned that her greatest pain could become her greatest purpose. Someone who had discovered that being underestimated was often the first step toward exceeding everyone's expectations, including her own. The train arrived right on schedule, just as it had that morning 5 years ago. But this time, Sarah Hayes watched it pull away with a smile, knowing that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do, with exactly the right person by her side. Some stories end where they began. This one had come full circle, but the circle was so much larger now that the starting point looked completely different from where they stood. And that, Sarah thought as she and Marcus drove toward their future, was exactly how transformation was supposed to work. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.